Hello, Caitlin. With your drawing of eggs, I think that you've done a fine job of assembling a good sort of composition. One idea I have for you is to use the strokes to create the illusion of three-dimensional form on your flat page. So let the strokes follow the roundness of the large soup mug or the roundness of the egg. This photo is blurry, and I want you to take more than one photo, and on your computer choose the best one to submit. Also, take your photos during day. Let's see, I'm wondering about this drapery drawing. An issue I have here is it does not seem that you've submitted your photos. There should be either 5 quick sketches or 5 photos showing different possible views of your subject submitted with this drawing. So it's hard for me to know just what it is you're drawing. It looks to me that this drawing has been abstracted a little bit. Hi, Joanna. I observed that the bottom version is the one that you submitted as your final. Clearly a lot of care has been taken here, a lot of time planning, and also a lot of control. In most cases, the eggs have a very geometric looking silhouette, so that's one matter solved. Curiously, I observed that the shadows are falling in different directions, which suggests to me that the light is directly overhead. In your drawing of drapery, I think that you've done a very good job of seeing how the drape folds. It's my understanding that the bottom drawing is the final. I would say please crop your drawing so that we can see it more closely. For a proper presentation, you shouldn't have anything showing in the background. As much as this drapery has been drawn accurately, I think there's a lot more room for shadowing. I think you can go far darker with your darkest values, even if this blanket was a white one. Well, hi, Anthony. There's a lot of charm to this drawing that you've made. I like the grouping of eggs outside the bowl and the way that they're stacked within it. Clearly, you're working on some subtle shading effects. As I've said before, I want to encourage you to let the edge of a subject be no darker than the value it surrounds. So, where we see just a line dividing one egg from the other, really on one side or the other of that line, there ought to be a value shift along the line itself. Now, looking here, it seems to me there are some very fine lines, and I'm wondering whether this may be a graphite drawing. Please note that a charcoal one was called for. Also, I want to get back to this cylinder lesson from last week. I want you to look at the bottom of your glass bowl and understand that it must be more curved in appearance than the top edge. Hi, Heidi. It seems you've got an efficient system going here for the creation of this egg still life. I like the touch you've used with your charcoal. I want to talk about the cast shadows. In some ways they're convincing, but in other ways they feel a little like a pool of liquid sitting at the bottom of each egg. I want you to be an astute judge of the shapes of cast shadows. Also, I'd like you to consider how the eggs are dark for the most part and the tabletop is white. And I think even in a situation where you had brown eggs on a white table, things wouldn't be quite this stark. One of my favorite eggs is the one toward the top at the left. Now, on to the second drawing. It appears to me that the one on the bottom is your final. I'm missing some of the bold darks from the above version, and I think that as much as for the final version you want to make the drawing more subtle, you don't want to lose the punch of your darkest darks. Now, if this was my drawing, one thing I would pay special attention to is probably the handle of this picture, because I feel as though in the final version it's melting into the background and a little hard to understand. Hi, Deborah. This is a nice view of your subject. I can see you're standing over it, but not directly over it. I like the subtle effects of the blending on the eggs. Some eggs in the front part of the bowl that are just beautiful. A little further back, it seems as though things might be outlined more and the shadows are less modeled. Well, I do agree that you can have a center of interest where things are very developed and toward the periphery they might be less developed. But I think if they're less developed, I'd also let them have less contrast too. Um, it helps to create horizontal strokes to assert the ground plane, and you can do that with your cast shadows. That will help the ground sit down and seem flat, which can be a hard thing to do in a drawing. Well, hello Jennifer V. If I'm correct, the top drawing is the one that you consider to be your final, and these look like two wholly different egg drawings. Now, you may have heard me say to others that it's important to avoid outlining. Let the edge of your shape be only as dark as the darker value on one or the other side of it. My favorite egg is the one in the foreground there. I'm thinking though, with that egg and the one behind it and the situation of them on the ground, do they seem crowded next to the dish? Now, this is a very lovely drawing that you've made for the drapery one, and I can see that you used a pillowcase, which to my way of thinking is just about the right amount of fabric to have to deal with. One thing that I note right away is that your photograph is horizontal or landscape, and your paper is vertical or portrait in its orientation. So I would say, try to get your page to match the shape of your still life. I love that big apple. I think that's what it is in the foreground. I like to see it juxtaposed against this very curious jug. I want you to take a look at the oval opening to the jug, right? If you stand above it, it looks like a circle, but it's going to look like an ellipse from your view, and that's something to check. Generally, your treatment of the folds in the fabric is quite nice. I like to see how you're starting to include a dark shadow at the left. Jennifer W., you certainly have been working hard. I think you've met all of the assignment criteria for both of the drawings. Let's see. Looking at your egg drawing, I think one of the most profound qualities there is the cast shadow from the bowl. I think it can be hard to draw so many eggs. I'm especially enchanted by the eggs that you have there sitting on the ground in the foreground. One of them looks a little pointy at its tip, and that's something that you could easily change. Thank you for submitting all of these photos and for properly labeling them. That was part of the assignment. Jennifer W., among the qualities here that I see in this drawing is this lovely notion that the underneath of the chair is a space, almost like a tent. I see how the drape falls across the seat and down the side on the left, and then it also falls down the back of the chair to the ground at the rear. Another thing I noticed right away is the strong shadow under the chair, which a lot of people aren't always brave enough to fill in. I like the candy cane type leg of this chair. It makes it a nice subject for drawing. One thing I might advise you for future when arranging a fabric still life is to try to let there be a few dominant folds. It often takes me a very long time to arrange drapery for a still life. I fuss with it and then I look at it for a while and I make some adjustments. I think here it would help you if there were a few large folds that you could focus on